The rain fell in sheets that night, the kind of storm that makes the city's streetlights blur into a hazy glow. In the quiet, gated mansion on the edge of town, a frail old woman sat by the window, her trembling hands clutching the edges of a faded quilt. Her eyes searched the darkness as if she were waiting for someone she had long forgotten yet desperately wanted to remember. The storm rattled the glass, but she didn't flinch. She whispered to herself, voice barely audible, "James, where are you, James?" Her mind drifted, lost in the fog of Alzheimer's, calling the name of her late husband, not knowing he'd been gone for years. The front door creaked open, and a figure rushed in, shaking the rain from her thin coat. She was a black woman in her mid-40s, exhausted yet carrying herself with quiet strength. Her name was Grace, and though she was no relative, she had become the anchor of this household. She placed her worn leather bag on the chair and hurried to the old woman's side. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, crouching beside her, "you're safe. No need to be afraid. I'm here now." The old woman's cloudy eyes darted toward her. For a moment, confusion, then a flicker of recognition, or was it trust? She reached out, her hand shaking violently. "You came back. You always come back." Grace smiled faintly, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. "Of course I did. I promised I'd look after you." But outside, the storm was not the only thing brewing. Across town, in the gleaming top floor of a skyscraper, Ethan Whitmore sat surrounded by lawyers and investment bankers. At 35, he was already one of the most ruthless millionaires in the city, heir to the Whitmore fortune but also self-made through aggressive real estate ventures. His sharp blue eyes rarely softened, and his schedule left no room for sentimentality. Yet tonight, as he signed the last of the contracts, his assistant reminded him, "Sir, tomorrow is your mother's birthday." Ethan paused, his pen hovering. For a split second, the mask of indifference cracked. His mother, the woman who had once tucked him in with stories, who baked his favorite cookies, who had defended him when his father's discipline was harsh. But now she was a shadow of that woman, ravaged by Alzheimer's, locked away in that mansion with hired help. He exhaled sharply, signing the paper. "I'll stop by in the morning," he muttered, almost as if it were an obligation rather than love. Back in the mansion, Grace guided Mrs. Whitmore to bed. The old woman resisted, panicking, crying out that thieves were coming, that someone wanted to hurt her. Grace wrapped her arms around her, whispering lullabies her own grandmother had once sung to her in the South. Slowly, the old woman's breathing calmed, her frail body relaxing into the sheets. Grace smoothed the blanket and stayed until the woman's eyelids fluttered closed. But just as Grace turned off the lamp, a loud crash echoed from the back door. Her heart jolted. She grabbed the small wooden bat she kept hidden behind the couch and crept toward the kitchen. The wind howled, lightning flashed, and then she saw it: two men, strangers, soaked to the bone, forcing their way in through the unlocked pantry door. Her pulse raced. "Burglars, quick," one of them hissed. "Grab the silverware. Old lady's upstairs. No one else here." But they were wrong. Grace stepped forward, her voice firm. "You need to leave. Now." The men froze, startled to see her. One sneered, "What's this to help? Out of the way, lady." She gripped the bat tighter, her knuckles white. "Not until you get out. There's nothing here worth your soul." The taller man laughed, advancing toward her. "Oh, I think there is." He lunged, but Grace swung hard, the bat connecting with his arm. He yelped, staggering back. His partner cursed, pulling a knife from his pocket. Adrenaline surged through Grace's veins. She wasn't fighting for herself, she was fighting for Mrs. Whitmore sleeping upstairs, for the promise she had made. "You won't touch her," she cried. The struggle was loud, chaotic. Furniture toppled, glass shattered. Grace dodged a swipe of the knife, narrowly escaping a cut. She swung again, hitting the intruder's leg, but the second man shoved her hard against the wall. Pain shot through her ribs, but she didn't let go. She screamed, a sound so fierce it cut through the storm. Upstairs, Mrs. Whitmore awoke, confused and terrified, calling for help, and it was at that very moment that Ethan, driving home earlier than expected, pulled up to the gates. He frowned when he noticed the side door ajar and shadows flickering inside. He stormed in, prepared to confront negligence or worse. What he saw froze him. His mother's black nanny, the woman he barely acknowledged when signing her paychecks, stood trembling but unbroken, wielding a bat against two burglars. One man clutched his bleeding arm, the other brandished a knife, and behind her, at the foot of the stairs, his frail mother sobbed in terror. For once, Ethan couldn't speak. Grace shouted at the intruders, "You're not taking another step." Lightning illuminated the room as Ethan stepped forward. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice thundered. The burglars, startled by the sudden presence of another man, bolted toward the back door. Grace gasped, still gripping the bat, her chest heaving. The knife clattered to the floor as the thieves vanished into the storm. Silence fell, broken only by Mrs. Whitmore's sobs. Ethan's eyes darted from the wrecked furniture to the trembling Nanny to his weeping mother. He had expected a quiet home. Instead, he had walked into a battlefield and, the one protecting his mother was not him, but the woman he had barely noticed all these years. His voice was low, almost accusatory. What happened here? Grace wiped a streak of blood from her cheek, her voice steady but weary. Your mother was in danger. I did what I had to do. Ethan stared at her, the weight of realization pressing on him. He had all the money in the world, all the power, but tonight, it was this woman, this underpaid, overlooked nanny, who had defended his mother with her life. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Whitmore felt something he didn't recognize. Shame, Ethan's chest tightened as he glanced at his mother. She clung to the banister, shaking violently, murmuring words that made no sense. He rushed over, trying to steady her, but she flinched from his touch. Her eyes were wild, darting past him, and then she whispered, "Don't let them take James. Please don't let them take him." Ethan froze. His father's name. She thought he was back in the house. She didn't see her son standing there. She saw a ghost. Grace stepped in gently, placing a calming hand on Mrs. Whitmore's shoulder. "You're safe, ma'am. No one's taking anyone. Let's go back upstairs. I'll make you some tea." The old woman blinked, her panic subsiding slightly at Grace's steady voice. She leaned on her, trusting her completely, and together they started up the stairs. Ethan followed, stunned, watching his mother cling to this woman more than to her own flesh and blood. When they reached the bedroom, Grace tucked her in with practiced tenderness. She smoothed the sheets, whispered reassurance, and hummed a melody until Mrs. Whitmore's eyelids fluttered closed again. Only when the old woman's breathing steadied did Grace turn back toward. Her face was tired, her hair messy, but her eyes were sharp. "You should check that all the doors are locked," she said simply. For a moment Ethan didn't move. He was still processing the chaos, the burglars, the image of Grace swinging a bat like a warrior, the way his mother responded only to her. He finally muttered, "Yeah, I'll handle it." Downstairs, he secured the doors, his mind spinning. He had assumed his mother was safe in the hands of staff. He had written checks, delegated responsibility, and washed his hands of her care. But tonight showed him what the paycheck couldn't buy: loyalty, courage, glove. Grace came down a few minutes later, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her ribs ached from where she had been shoved, but she hid the pain. Ethan studied her in the dim light. "You could have been killed," he said flatly. She met his gaze. "And your mother could have been hurt. I wasn't about to let that happen." He frowned, unsettled. "Why? She's not your family. You don't owe her anything." Her jaw tightened. "Maybe not by blood, but she's human, and she deserves to feel safe, even if her own mind won't let her." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For once in his career-driven life, he didn't know how to respond. The silence stretched, heavy. Finally, Grace broke it. "I should clean up the mess before she wakes again." She bent to pick up the broken glass, wincing at the pain in her ribs. Ethan watched her. Something twisted inside him, a discomfort he didn't recognize. Guilt. He crouched down suddenly, picking up shards alongside her. Grace looked at him, surprised. Their hands brushed briefly, and she pulled away quickly, focusing on the task. When the floor was clear, Grace sat down at the edge of the couch, her shoulders sagging. "I'll stay awake the rest of the night, just in case they come back." Ethan studied her again. The woman had nearly been stabbed, yet she spoke as though this was routine, as though protecting his mother was part of her heartbeat. He wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck. Gratitude didn't come easily to him. Hours passed. Rain softened to a drizzle. Ethan dozed in a chair, but Grace stayed awake, listening to every creak and rustle. When dawn broke, she brewed coffee and checked on Mrs. Whitmore, who was still sleeping soundly. When Ethan awoke, sunlight slanted through the curtains. He rubbed his eyes, disoriented. Grace was by the stove, humming softly as she prepared oatmeal. "You cooked too?" he asked groggily. She glanced at him. Some mornings it helps her stay calm. Familiar smells, familiar routines. Alzheimer's, patience, they hold on to little anchors like that. Her tone was patient, almost like a teacher. Ethan leaned back, watching her. He realized how little he knew about this disease, how little he knew about his own mother's daily struggles. When Mrs. Whitmore awoke, she smiled faintly at the smell of cinnamon, a fleeting moment of clarity. "James used to love oatmeal," she whispered. Grace smiled back. Yes, ma'am, and so do you. Ethan sat quietly at the table, his heart aching as he watched his mother eat slowly, Grace gently guiding her through every bite he remembered. A time when she had guided him like this, encouraging him to finish his vegetables, praising his drawings, kissing his scraped knees. Now the roles were reversed, and he wasn't the one stepping up. Grace was. Later that morning, when Mrs. Whitmore was settled with a puzzle in the parlor, Ethan pulled Grace aside. I want to know something, he said. Why do you do all this? This isn't just a job for you. Why? Grace hesitated, her eyes clouding. Because I know what it's like to watch someone you love disappear piece by piece. My grandmother raised me, strongest woman I ever knew. And then, Alzheimer's took her from me long before death did. I couldn't save her, but I can make sure someone else doesn't go through it alone. Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied it. That's why. Ethan stared at her, his chest heavy. He had dismissed her as just the help, but she carried more love, more strength, than most people he knew. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. It was his business partner, impatient about a meeting. Ethan's world tugged at him again, demanding his focus, demanding he put wealth above all else. He glanced back at his mother and then at Grace. For the first time, he hesitated to answer. Let the phone ring. The rest of the day passed in quiet rhythm. Grace helped Mrs. Whitmore through her routines, calming her during moments of panic, laughing with her during fleeting moments of lucidity. Ethan watched, learning, absorbing. Each scene was a knife to his conscience. That evening, as Grace prepared to leave, Ethan stopped her at the door. His voice was awkward, unused to humility. Thank you, for last night, for everything. Grace gave a small nod. It's my job. No, Ethan said firmly. It's more than that. I see that now. She looked at him for a long moment, then simply said, Good night, Mr. Whitmore, and walked out into the fading light. Ethan stood there, unsettled. The millionaire who thought he controlled everything realized for the first time that his mother's world and maybe his own was held together by someone society overlooked, and it left him shaken to his core. But little did he know, the events of that stormy night were only the beginning. The city lights glowed outside Ethan's office window, but his mind wasn't on the stack of contracts spread across his desk. Numbers blurred, deals felt empty. He could still see Grace standing in that kitchen, clutching a bat, defending his mother with more courage than he had ever shown. He could still hear her voice when she said she stayed because no one deserves to go through it alone. But voice clung to him like a shadow. His business partner Mark noticed the distraction during their meeting. Ethan, you're not here. What's going on? Nothing, Ethan muttered, flipping through papers he wasn't reading. Mark smirked. Nothing. You've built this empire by being sharp. Lately you're slipping. Don't tell me this is about your mother. Ethan's jaw clenched. She's still alive, Mark. She's gone. Ethan, Mark said coldly. You're just clinging to a shell. That's what Alzheimer's does. You should put her in a facility and move on. We've got deals to close. The words hit like knives. Ethan shoved the papers aside, his voice sharp. She's not a shell, and I won't abandon her. Mark raised his brows. Since when do you care? You barely visited before. Ethan had no answer. He just grabbed his coat and walked out, leaving Mark frowning behind him. When he returned to the mansion, he found Grace in the garden with his mother. The old woman was humming to herself, her frail hands brushing over roses as though they were faces she remembered. Grace knelt beside her, listening, smiling as though every word mattered. Ethan stood there, unseen, watching. It struck him that Grace gave his mother more presence than he ever had. Every gesture was patient, deliberate. Every smile was genuine. When Grace finally noticed him, she rose to her feet, brushing soil from her hands. You're back early, she said cautiously. Business can wait, Ethan said. She arched a brow, unconvinced. But she didn't push. That evening, while Grace prepared dinner, Ethan sat with his mother. For the first time in years, he tried to talk to her. Mum, it's me, Ethan. Her eyes flickered with brief recognition, then clouded again. James, you came back. The name stabbed his chest. She thought he was his father again. Ethan swallowed hard. No, Mum, it's Ethan, your son, but she didn't hear. She kept smiling faintly, whispering memories that weren't his. Ethan sat there helpless, realizing how much of her he had already lost. Grace entered quietly with a tray, watching the scene unfold. She set the food down and spoke softly. Sometimes it's better to meet her where she is. If she thinks you're James, let her. It brings her peace. Ethan's eyes flashed. So I should lie to her. It's not lying, Grace said firmly. It's kindness. Her world is slipping away. What matters is how she feels in this moment, not whether she remembers facts. Ethan stared at her, conflicted. Part of him wanted to argue, but part of him knew she was right. Later, after his mother was asleep, Ethan found Grace sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea. He leaned against the counter. How do you do it? Day after day, watching her fade, and still caring. Grace looked into her tea. Because she's still here. Maybe not the way you remember, but she laughs, she sings, she feels love. That's enough. That has to be enough. Ethan was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, I don't know how to be around her anymore. Grace met his eyes. Then learn. She needs you more than you realize. Money can't replace family. Her words cut deep because they came from someone who wasn't family, yet had become more of it than he had been. The days turned into weeks. Ethan started visiting more often, lingering longer. At first, he stayed in the background, observing Grace, learning her methods, how she calmed his mother during storms, how she distracted her during confusion, how she celebrated small victories like a completed puzzle piece or a remembered song lyric. Slowly, Ethan began to imitate her, awkward at first, but improving. One evening, his mother looked at him and said, You have your father's eyes. For the first time, Ethan didn't correct her. He smiled and replied, So I've been told. Grace caught his glance from across the room, a small nod of approval passing between them. But not everyone saw Grace the way Ethan was beginning to. At a charity gala one weekend, whispers circulated when Ethan brought both his mother and Grace. Wealthy socialites eyed Grace with disdain, their smiles tight, their words dripping with condescension. Is she the help? One woman whispered, loudly enough for Grace to hear. Strange to see her sitting at the family table. Grace lowered her eyes, pretending not to hear, but her chest burned with humiliation. Ethan noticed. For once he didn't stay silent. She's not just the help, Ethan said sharply. She's the reason my mother is still here today. Show some respect. The table went quiet. Grace looked at him, startled. No one had ever defended her like that in public. After the gala, as they walked back to the car, Grace said softly, You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Ethan replied. You've been invisible too long. Not anymore. Grace didn't answer, but her eyes glistened in the streetlights. Back at the mansion, tension grew when Mark arrived unannounced. He pulled Ethan aside. Are you doing parading around with the nanny? People are talking. Ethan's jaw tightened. Let them talk. This isn't like you, Mark hissed. You're risking your reputation, your deals, everything over some woman. Some woman, Ethan snapped. She saved my mother's life. She's given her dignity when I didn't. Don't you dare reduce her. Mark's face hardened. You're changing, Ethan, and not for the better. But Ethan no longer cared what Mark thought. For the first time, he felt like he was seeing clearly. The weeks continued. But so did the challenges. Mrs. Whitmore's condition worsened. Periods of confusion, occasional outbursts, even forgetting how to hold utensils. One night she grew violent, throwing plates, screaming at shadows. Ethan panicked, not knowing what to do. Grace stepped in, holding the old woman gently, whispering prayers until she calmed. Ethan watched, helpless, ashamed that he couldn't reach his own mother. Later, he confessed to Grace, I'm afraid. Every time I look at her, I see pieces slipping away, and I can't stop it. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. You can't stop it, but you can walk with her through it. That's what love is. Those words stayed with him, echoing louder than any business deal or profit margin ever had. That as winter crept in, Ethan began spending nights at the mansion instead of his penthouse. He found himself sharing late-night conversations with Grace, learning about her past, her struggles, her dreams. She spoke of growing up poor, working 3 jobs to support her younger siblings, facing prejudice every step of the way, yet she carried no bitterness, only strength. One night by the fire, Ethan asked, Don't you ever feel angry, that you give so much and get so little recognition? Grace gazed at the flames. Recognition isn't why I do it, but yes, sometimes it hurts. People look at me and see nothing but my skin, my job. They don't see my heart. But I can't let their blindness change who I am. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He had once been one of those people. Silence settled between them, heavy but warm. And in that silence, Ethan realized something terrifying. He was beginning to care. Not just about his mother, about Grace, but caring meant risk. And Ethan Whitmore had never risked his heart before. Snow blanketed the city in silence. But inside the Whitmore mansion, the silence was anything but peaceful. Mrs. Whitmore's cries echoed through the halls, her frail body trembling as she clutched the edge of her bed. She shouted names that didn't belong to the present, her father, her husband, even childhood friends long gone. Ethan rushed in, heart pounding, but his mother shoved him away. terrified, screaming, "You're not supposed to be here. Thieves, thieves in the house." He froze, helpless. Every word cut him deeper. Grace appeared in the doorway, calm despite the chaos. She hurried to the bedside, kneeling beside the trembling woman. "It's all right, ma'am. It's me, Grace. You're safe. No thieves. Just your friends here." The old woman's eyes softened at Grace's voice. Slowly, her grip loosened. Grace held her hand, humming softly until the panic melted into exhaustion. Within minutes, Mrs. Whitmore was breathing evenly again, asleep once more. Ethan stood there, shoulders slumped. "She doesn't even recognize me anymore," he whispered. Grace glanced at him. "She feels you, even if she doesn't say your name. Love isn't always spoken." But Ethan's heart twisted. He left the room silently, the weight of loss pressing harder each day. The following week, the doctor came for a checkup. His words were grim. "The disease is progressing faster. Her motor functions are declining. Soon, she may not be able to swallow properly. You need to start preparing." Ethan gripped the arm of the chair, his knuckles white. "Preparing for what?" The doctor sighed. "For the end, Mr. Whitmore. I'm sorry." After he left, Ethan stormed into his study, slamming the door. Grace found him pacing like a caged animal. "I can't do this," he muttered. "I can't watch her fade piece by piece." Grace closed the door behind her. "And what? You'd rather look away? Leave her alone." His anger snapped. "I'm not like you. I don't have the strength to sit there smiling while she forgets me." Grace stepped closer, her voice sharp. "You think this is easy for me? Every day I watch her lose something else, and it breaks me too. But I stay. Because love isn't about what's easy, it's about what's right." Her words hung in the air. Ethan sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then softly, almost like a confession, he said, "I don't know how to love like that." Grace's voice softened. "Then let her teach you. Even now, she can, if you'll let yourself listen." The next few days, Ethan tried to read to his mother from her favorite books. Even when she interrupted with nonsense, he played her old records, watching her eyes light up faintly at familiar melodies. He held her hand longer than before, and though she often mistook him for someone else, he forced himself not to correct her, following Grace's advice. But outside the mansion, whispers grew louder. The media caught sight of Ethan spending time at home instead of at board meetings. Rumors spread that he was distracted, softened, even weak. Investors grew nervous. Mark confronted him again. "You're risking everything." Mark snapped in the office one morning. "Our deals are crumbling. Your name is being dragged. And why? Because of that nanny. She's got you wrapped around her finger." Ethan's voice was ice. "Say her name." Mark blinked. "What?" "Grace. Her name is Grace, and she's done more for my family than you or anyone else ever has." Mark sneered. "You're letting emotions ruin you. Wake up, Ethan. This woman, she's beneath you. Everyone sees it but you." The words hit like poison. Ethan's fists clenched, rage burning. "Get out," he said coldly. Mark's laugh was bitter. "You're going to lose everything over her. Don't say I didn't warn you." He left, slamming the door, leaving Ethan trembling with fury. That night, Ethan returned home later than usual, his mind still boiling. As he walked in, he overheard Grace in the kitchen on the phone. Her voice was low, weary. Double quotes. "Yes, I'll send the money this week. I know it's late. I've been working extra hours. Please, just give me time. My brother needs his medication." Ethan froze. He hadn't known. He thought she was here only for the paycheck, but clearly, she was struggling too, carrying burdens in silence. When she hung up, she noticed him standing there. "How much did you hear?" she asked, stiff. "Enough," Ethan admitted. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away. "Because it's not your problem. My family has always had to fight our own battles." Ethan stepped closer. "You fight for everyone else. Let someone fight for you." Grace shook her head, swallowing hard. "People like me don't get knights in shining armor. We learn to be our own." For the first time, Ethan reached out, gently touching her hand. "Maybe you don't have to anymore." The air between them shifted, unspoken feelings rising, dangerous and undeniable. Grace pulled her hand back, her voice trembling. "Don't do this, Ethan. Don't confuse gratitude with something else." But Ethan's eyes lingered on her. He knew it was more. The following weekend, the family lawyer visited, bringing documents about the estate. As they discussed finances, the lawyer offhandedly remarked, "Of course, when your mother passes, the staff will need to be let go, including what's her name, the colored lady." Grace was in the next room, within earshot. Her face went rigid, tears threatening but unspilled. She turned quietly and walked out to the garden, her chest tight. Ethan heard the remark, fury flooding him. Don't ever speak about her like that again, he snapped. She has a name, and she's not going anywhere. The lawyer blinked, startled. I didn't mean, I don't care what you meant. Ethan cut him off. She's family. The word stunned even him. But he meant it. Later he found Grace in the garden, staring at the snow. He joined her in silence before finally saying, I called you family today. Grace's eyes glistened. Do you mean that, or was it just to shut him up? Ethan looked at her, steady. I've never meant anything more. She turned away, torn between hope and fear. Family doesn't always come easy for people like me. Too many times I've been reminded I don't belong. Ethan's voice softened. You belong here. The words hung in the cold air, fragile and dangerous. Grace didn't reply, but her trembling breath said everything that night. As the house settled into silence, Ethan lay awake, realizing the truth he had been avoiding. He wasn't just grateful to Grace. He wasn't just impressed. He was falling for her, and it terrified him because, in his world, love like that was forbidden. The spring sun poured through the mansion windows, but the air inside was heavy, restless. Mrs. Whitmore lay in bed, frailer than ever, her voice reduced to murmurs. Ethan sat at her side, holding her hand, feeling her pulse weaken beneath his fingers. Grace stood nearby, adjusting pillows, humming softly as she always did, anchoring the room with her calm presence. Ethan's eyes burned with unshed tears. She barely eats now. Some days she doesn't even open her eyes. Grace placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. She's tired, her body's letting go. But she's still here, Ethan. Every touch, every word, you're still reaching her. He nodded, swallowing hard, clinging to her words like lifelines. Days turned into a blur of caretaking. Ethan cancelled meetings, ignored phone calls, and stayed by his mother's side. His empire began to wobble. Investors pulled back. Tabloids mocked him, calling him distracted and soft. Mark returned one afternoon, barging into the mansion, his voice dripping with disdain. This is madness. Ethan, you've thrown away everything. We built deals are collapsing. Your reputation is in ruins, and for what? To sit here babysitting a woman who doesn't even know your name, and with her that nanny, she's bleeding you dry. Grace stiffened, her chest tightening. She lowered her eyes, accustomed to such venom, but Ethan stood abruptly, his fury igniting. Don't you dare talk about her that way, he snapped. She's given more to this family than anyone else ever has, including me. Mark sneered. You've lost your mind. You're letting her manipulate you. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and deadly. If protecting the woman who saved my mother is madness, then I'll gladly stay mad. Now get out of this house and out of my life. Mark smirked bitterly, shaking his head. You'll regret this. Everything will crumble. Ethan didn't flinch. Let it. Mark stormed out, slamming the door. Silence followed, heavy and charged. Grace stared at Ethan, stunned. You didn't have to do that. He was your partner. He was poison, Ethan replied, and I should have cut him out long ago. Grace's throat tightened. You're risking everything. Ethan turned to her, his eyes steady. No, for the first time, I'm saving something worth everything. The unspoken words between them trembled in the air, fragile and undeniable. That night, Mrs. Whitmore had a rare moment of clarity. She opened her eyes, gazing at Ethan with surprising focus. Ethan, she whispered. His heart leaped. Mum, you know me, she smiled faintly, her voice quivering. Of course I do. You were always my boy, stubborn but good. Tears flooded Ethan's eyes. I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. I'm sorry I left you alone. Her frail hand squeezed his. You're here now. That's all that matters. She turned her gaze toward Grace. And you, my angel, you've kept me safe. Grace's eyes glistened as she knelt beside the bed. I promised I would. Mrs. Whitmore smiled faintly. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's love. Her words hung in the room like a blessing. Hours later, she drifted back into sleep, and she never woke again. The funeral was quiet, attended by dignitaries and socialites who whispered about the Whitmore fortune. Some cast side glances at Grace, wondering why she stood near the front, why Ethan stayed close to her side. Whispers turned to gasps when Ethan spoke. He stood before the gathered crowd, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. My mother taught me that love matters more than wealth, more than power. She gave me everything, and when she could no longer fight for herself, Grace did. Grace stood by her, protected her, loved her when even I failed to. If you want to honor my mother, honor the people like Grace, people who give without expecting, who stand invisible until we open our eyes. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their polished masks cracking. Grace lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. After the service, a wealthy widow approached Ethan, her smile brittle. "It was touching what you said, but surely you don't intend to keep her around. She's staff, after all." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's not staff, she's family." He reached for Grace's hand, holding it firmly for all to see. "And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem, not mine." Gasps rippled through the crowd, scandalized whispers flying, but Ethan didn't let go. Grace trembled, torn between fear and something she had buried for too long, hope. Later, alone in the quiet mansion, Ethan turned to her. "I meant every word. You're not invisible to me, Grace. Not anymore." Her voice shook. "People will talk. They'll say terrible things about me, about us. Let them," Ethan said firmly. "For once, I don't care what the world thinks. I only care about what's real. And you," he took her hands, "you're the most real thing I've ever known." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Ethan, I don't want to be another charity project. I don't want your guilt." He shook his head, his voice breaking. "This isn't guilt. It's love. I love you, Grace." The words silenced her for a long moment. She just stared, searching his eyes for deceit, for pity, for anything false. But all she saw was truth. Slowly, trembling, she whispered, "I've spent my life being told I'm less important, less worthy. But when I'm with you, I feel seen." Ethan cupped her face gently. "Then let me keep seeing you. Every day, as long as you'll let me." Her tears turned to a shaky smile. "Then don't stop." He kissed her, gentle and reverent, sealing what had been building through pain, courage, and defiance. Months passed. The mansion grew quieter without Mrs. Whitmore, but not empty. Ethan and Grace rebuilt their world together. Ethan rebuilt his business too, smaller but stronger, guided not by greed but by purpose. Grace started a foundation in Mrs. Whitmore's name, funding caregivers for Alzheimer's patients who couldn't afford help. Ethan backed it fully, using his fortune for something that mattered. At the foundation's opening ceremony, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. One asked bluntly, "Mr. Whitmore, some say you've tarnished your reputation by aligning yourself with—" He glanced at Grace with disdain. "Someone of her background. What do you say to that?" Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled Grace close, his arm around her, his voice fierce. "Then let my reputation burn. Because if love, loyalty, and courage tarnish it, then it wasn't worth having in the first place." The cameras flashed wildly, the crowd buzzing, but Grace only looked at him, her eyes shining. She had been invisible to the world, but to him, she was everything. And together they walked forward, hand in hand, carrying with them the legacy of a woman who had taught them both that true family is forged not by blood, but by love. The story closed not with wealth or power, but with something richer, a bond that no prejudice could break, no illness could erase. And the lesson was clear. Sometimes the greatest fortune isn't what you inherit, but the love you choose to honor.